Salaryman is summoned by the Demon King to serve as his celestial king in another world. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. The Demon King summons someone to be one of the 4 great generals of his army. The woman's name is Ulmandra, the Aggressor of Hell. Next, the king summons Sylphid, the Archmage of the Storm. After that, Gnome, the Crust Barrier. Finally, the Demon Lord announces he will bring forth the one who will become a pivotal force in conviction in the army, a soul summoned from another world, the vessel of the 4 generals who controls water. His name is Denisuke Uchimura, the Overseas Manager. After this mythological introduction, startled by everything, the human gives a timid hello to the group. As far as he knew, Uchimura was just an insignificant employee at Teo Works Corporation. He had survived the hellish phase of job hunting and started his job full of hope. However, while his colleagues were being promoted, he went unrecognized. Then suddenly, he was ordered to transfer overseas for a factory construction plan. According to some colleagues, the manager had pulled some strings and dumped this problem on Uchimura. Despite all this, the young man remained loyal to his job and still believed things would get better. When he arrived at his new work post far from Japan, he worked hard. Yet, even as he complained to management that he lacked staff and equipment to do his job, all Uchimura got in return were scoldings from his superiors, as if he were wasting the company's money. Over time, Denisuke endured until things slightly improved, but just as everything started working, he received news of another transfer. Sometime later at his new destination, the man wondered why he worked so hard. Amid these reflections, poor Uchimura is also hit by a motorcycle and loses his life. From there, we know where he ended up. Before him, the Demon King welcomes Denisuke Uchimura and explains that he personally summoned the human to become one of the 4 great generals, the Overseas Manager. After all, Uchimura was appointed to work abroad, learned the local language, educated the people of the region, and led the new business successfully. Because of this, the Demon King believes this man is ideal for his army. Hearing this, Uchimura is glad that the demon appreciated his work, but he feels that joining the Devil's army seems more like a step back in life than a promotion. At this point, the king informs him that the human will have compensation and authority equivalent to managers on Earth, with the freedom to choose his subordinates and entitlement to a personal office. If he refuses the offer, Denisuke will be sent back to his world. Delighted with the respect for labor rights, the human begins to see the Demon King as a cool guy. Finally, the Underworld Emperor asks what his decision will be. Uchimura starts to recall all the humiliations he suffered on Earth and tells the king that a nobody like him doesn't deserve to work for someone so important. However, the Demon King boosts his morale, saying that he should not let himself be affected by the nonsense people said about him. After all, people only appreciate what they want to and don't value the piano carriers who do all the hard work. However, the Demon King saw the work done by Uchimura and knows his worth. By the way, the Emperor asserts that it's not Uchimura's job to determine whether he has value or not, nor is it the job of his former boss. From now on, that's the duty of the Demon King who summoned Uchimura because he needs him. So it boils down to basic reasoning. Either the human goes back to Earth and is treated like a dog, or he works for the king in a new world where the sky's the limit. However, before Uchimura could rethink, Ulmandra opposes the master's decision, believing that a weak human like him cannot serve as one of the 4 generals. Similarly, Sylphid is against the idea, as is Gnome. In that case, the Demon King proposes to test the summoned man, and the outcome will determine the master's final decision. Uchimura hates the idea, but Ulmandra agrees, especially after hearing that humans from other worlds have special powers, and she wants to test this right now by delivering a deadly kick to Uchimura. The man sees the lay coming his way and starts to bid farewell to his second life, but the Demon King blocks his subordinate's kick and remarks that she gets blind when taken over by emotions. To show the result of the general's rash behavior, the Lord points to Uchimura, who fainted from the shock but is still standing. With this, Ulmandra starts to think that this guy is just a normal human, and the chief explains that he is exactly that. The other generals want to know where the special skills and powerful magics are, but the king reaffirms that Uchimura is just an ordinary guy. Once again, Ulmandra does not want to accept this man as one of the 4 generals, while Gnome recalls that the army is made up of monsters, and if an incompetent human enters a war between demons and demi-humans, he'll be devoured in the blink of an eye. Although Gnome remembers that, in her opinion, it's always the demons who start the fight. Hearing this provocation, Ulmandra starts a fight with her colleagues since, according to her, it's the demi-humans who always complain about everything. Finally, the Demon King acknowledges that there's friction within the military forces, but this is exactly why he summoned Denisuke Uchimura, not for his muscles, but for his talent. Meanwhile, Uchimura wakes up, still thinking he's being attacked, and waves his arms as if that could stop the kick. Taking advantage of the human waking up, the Dark Lord reinforces that the test will be conducted. Regarding this test, the king explains that his army is trying to make a pact with the neighboring clans, namely the Salamander clan and the Werewolf clan. However, negotiations with the Minotaur clan are proving quite difficult, and this is where Uchimura comes in. His first mission is to conclude a pact with the Minotaurs, winning their trust with his negotiation skills to the point of inviting them to join the demon army. If he has any questions, Uchimura should ask his predecessor, Ulmandra. After absorbing those words, Uchimura wandered the halls of that gloomy castle, unable to believe this was happening to him. Lacking patience for the man's drama, Ulmandra told him to stop being a wimp. She made it clear that he wouldn't pass this test. On that point, Uchimura couldn't agree more. After all, he knew he was just a useless employee who couldn't use magic or special skills. Amidst these thoughts, he remembered the Demon King's words about not letting others sway him. Honestly, Uchimura had always wanted to work for a boss who truly needed him and recognized his worth, and the Dark Lord showed that he was that person, if he was a person at all. Eventually, Ulmandra led Uchimura to the room used by the chief of the Minotaur clan, and the man was terrified at the sheer size of the door. Ulmandra warned beforehand that these bulls were quite fierce, and that Uchimura should be careful not to get trampled into a carpet of flesh and skin. With that, she opened the room's door, and although nervous for his test, Uchimura tried to compose himself to do his best. However, as soon as he laid eyes on the gigantic Minotaur, he tucked his tail between his legs, imagining he would indeed become the carpet his co-worker had mentioned. Seeing that the human would need help, Ulmandra told him to observe how negotiations were done there. After saying this, the demoness approached the giant bull, Terius, and asked for a minute of his attention. However, despite the initial calm, she completely lost her composure and grumbled that the Horned One was complaining about the room again, infuriating the big guy. Without delay, the negotiation went south, so Ulmandra took Uchimura outside and explained that the Minotaurs were willing to make a pact, but there was a day when Terius suddenly refused the terms, even though the conversation had been going great. After that, Ulmandra returned several times to finalize the negotiation, but each time that bull refused to talk, and to make matters worse, even tried to bring a bunch of junk to throw in the room. With that said, it was for this reason that the rest of the job would fall to Uchimura, so the demoness left, leaving the man alone. In front of the room with the enormous bull, the human heard all the furious noise from Terius and returned to wandering the corridors with a look of terror on his face. Imagining a negotiation in front of that house-sized creature, a light reflected in Uchimura's eyes, forming the sign of a bar. There the man found himself in that very establishment, sitting down to order the usual from the owner. After wiping his face with the offered towel, Denosuke reflected that if the client refused to negotiate, there was no way to proceed. Meanwhile, as he drank the Demon King's beverage, he remembered a similar situation before. Once, there was a guy who just kept saying no all the time, and Uchimura was about to give up on the negotiation. But when they looked each other in the eye, they somehow understood each other. After reflecting on this, Uchimura set his glass on the counter and left the bar. Back in the castle's corridors, the man straightened his tie and decided he was going to resolve this mess. Meanwhile, Ulmandra reported that Terius continued to refuse to talk and that it would be impossible for the human to turn the situation around. Still, the Demon King insisted that Uchimura be observed for a while longer. Soon, the Demon General went to Terius' room where Uchimura was messing with the Minotaur's trash. She angrily asked what he was doing, and he explained he was going to try a more appropriate conversation with Lord Terius because, even though he was large, size didn't matter in a negotiation. If the conversation went poorly, something was wrong, and the only way to reconcile was by looking into each other's eyes, persisting and building trust. At that moment, the demoness saw that the look of failure had disappeared from the human's face as he entered the bull's room with a bag full of hay. The next day, Ulmandra entered Terius' room worried and saw that the place had turned into a pile of trash. She imagined that the monster had destroyed the man. However, Uchimura showed up and reported that the leader of the Minotaurs was in the process of making an alliance pact with the Demon King. The woman asked how this was possible, and the human said that there's a famous saying: "If you know the enemy and yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." They then went to the throne room, where the pact was about to be sealed. Uchimura told Ulmandra that, in fact, Terius thought the negotiations were going well. He had once been through a similar conversation where the client kept saying no, and he was thinking about giving up. But then that client seemed happy and asked to shake hands with Denosuke because for him, lively and emotional discussions were a good thing. Being from abroad, that was how that man expressed his emotions in his culture. Then, when he looked into the Minotaur's eyes and told him the negotiation was going down the drain, the giant didn't understand why. Apparently, it's a courtesy among Minotaurs to place hay in the rooms they will use because they are large and afraid of breaking any beds. So Terius was sleepy and getting annoyed by not being understood. Then Ulmandra blamed herself for not having been able to understand the visitor, but Terius approached and corrected that the fault was also his for not knowing he was being rude. After the Minotaur left, the Demon King proved that Uchimura sees what others do not. Therefore, he gave the man a bracelet that recognized him as one of the 4 generals. With that, Ulmandra touched her bracelet to Uchimura's and explained that this was how her clan welcomed new friends. After the subordinates left, the Demon King pondered that his army was still immature and incomplete, but that the brilliance of Demosuke Uchimura would be capable of illuminating all the troops. In the days that had passed, Uchimura could scarcely believe he was working directly for a being known as the Demon King, and moreover serving as a general with his own office. Reviewing the chart of the nation, while small, it seemed well organized. Despite his concerns about not meeting expectations, Uchimura was determined to give his best, especially since the Dark Lord had placed his trust in him, a once mediocre employee. While pondering this, he opened a window and inadvertently let in several demonic bats, letting out a scream of fear. Later, having decided to accept this job, Uchimura implemented some etiquette rules to improve the environment, for instance, getting to know his colleagues better. With this in mind, he went to visit Sylphid's room, but a secretary named Belinda answered and informed him that the Storm Archmage had been out for some time, but that Uchimura's visit would be reported. Despite his initial attempt being thwarted, Uchimura recalled a business world lesson. One must win after losing, so he headed to the next general. However, Ulmandra interrupted him, saying he was being summoned by the Demon King for a new task. Arriving there, the human discovered he was to form an alliance with the Ogre clan. According to the Demon King, the demonic army was still a growing force and needed to collaborate with semi-human clans in the region to match larger forces, including the ogres. This faction had a strength comparable to the demons, and its leader acted dominantly toward the neighbors. Because of this, the ogres were wary of the demons and had imposed information control in recent years, complicating matters. Ideally, an alliance would be great, but there was also a chance the ogres would be hostile, and everything could fall apart. According to the Demon King in Uchimura's world, this would be called negotiating an alliance with a competitor. Speaking of the human, the king believed that only he could accomplish this task. With that said, Ulmandra realized she had no choice but to guide the overseas manager on this journey, making it clear, albeit not entirely honestly, that she would be worried if it weren't for Uchimura's involvement. Later, she emphasized that the two would work together again as great generals. Speaking of which, the man wished he could talk to Gnome about this negotiation, as she led the semi-human forces and could provide valuable information about the ogres. As Ulmandra saw the semi-humans, she refused to accompany her colleague and argued that she would check the carriage. According to Uchimura, it was better for them to divide the tasks to advance things, though it seemed the demoness was merely jealous. Subsequently, Uchimura watched the semi-humans train and was impressed. After the leader interrupted the exercise, she informed the soldiers that their precision with the bow and spear had improved. Then she ordered an officer to provide a well-deserved rest for the subordinates. Uchimura hadn't expected the morale of these troops to be so high, nor that the Earth Crust Barrier would be such a talented commander. Meanwhile, Gnome approached and asked the purpose of the overseas manager's visit. He explained about the negotiation mission with the Ogre clan, and the semi-human mentioned their leader was named Ogier and was a tricky opponent. Known for his bravery and audacity, he was seen as a dictator by enemies. As for the rest, the girl preferred that the human see for himself. Aside from that, Gnome demanded that Ulmandra be kept away from her, as she was exuding an annoying hatred. Unaware that the demoness was right behind him, Uchimura got a shock. Meanwhile, the Hell Aggressor mentioned she was just concerned about her traveling companion and had come to call him since everything was ready for departure and he was taking his time. Out of patience, Gnome ordered Uchimura to leave with that thing, further irritating Ulmandra. As he listened to the argument between the two, Uchimura reflected on their troubled relationship. After the journey, the dude sent by the Demon King ended up waiting at the entrance to the Ogre's castle, to the point Ulmandra grew impatient and demanded quicker action. However, the guards made it clear they could only allow the visitors in with the chief's permission, even though they were two of the four greats. Reflecting on this, Uchimura mentioned that making the other wait was a common tactic to unsettle the opponent, so it was better for her to stay calm. Nonetheless, the demoness was in no mood to play it cool and wasn't afraid to radiate hatred, with her vast power surrounding her body, which frightened the ogres. However, a local representative arrived, apologized for the delay, and invited the visitors inside. Once inside, Uchimura carefully observed his surroundings and analyzed every detail to gather valuable clues for conducting the conversation. Yet Ulmandra asked him not to look around too much, as it could show weakness. After all, the ogres were extraordinary beings, their strength comparable to the Demon Lord's army. But Uchimura knew the biggest problem. Indeed, the man knew. According to Gnome, Ogier, the ogre chief, was a complicated individual. Finally, the guide led the foreigners to a massive gate. As the door opened, the human let a drop of sweat fall as the anxiety of not knowing exactly what he was dealing with was overwhelming. Then they met the local clan leader. Ulmandra began speaking about the purpose of their arrival, but Ogre ordered her to speak only when given permission. Knowing his colleague had a short fuse, Uchimura noticed she was making a great effort to control herself after that rebuff. Eventually, Ogre asked if the demons had come to surrender to the ogres. If so, the only condition was that the head of the demon lord be brought. Hearing this challenge, the Hell Aggressor almost lost her cool, but Uchimura held her wrist and asked for time to consider the proposal. Afterward, he withdrew with his companion. Far from Ogre, the girl exploded to vent the anger she felt. However, Uchimura explained that the ogre's intention was to irritate both of them and end the negotiations without causing unnecessary conflicts. By aggravating Ulmandra, Ogre aimed to pin the blame on the negotiators if the talks didn't go well. Although upset by the insult, Uchimura knew he could not always express his anger, as it would disadvantage the Demon King in the negotiations. Ogre would use the demonic negotiators' poor behavior to ally with other nations and attack the demon army. Considering there wasn't even proper space to talk, the human decided to retreat for the time being. Either way, neither Uchimura nor Ulmandra knew exactly how to proceed from now on. At that moment, the earlier guide introduces herself as Olulu, Ogre's daughter. Despite Ulmandra's suspicion, Olulu wishes for the visitors to dethrone her father. Having said that, she leads them to the castle's food storage, which was empty. According to her, the ogres used to wield great influence over neighboring clans, but now they are facing severe financial issues. But Uchimura confesses he had suspected as much as he noticed upon arrival that the soldiers' equipment was in poor condition and the entire castle was dim and lifeless. It is a common sight in companies on the brink of bankruptcy. When one person decides the course of everything, decisions may be made quickly, but this isn't always the best option for financial health. Ululu says that's what's happening here, and the only way to rebuild the ogre clan is with help from the demon army, but her father won't listen. Besides, she reveals with tears in her eyes that he is ill and the control of information is due to this. However, if Ogre dies suddenly, the problem will be even greater. Uchimura understands the girl's concern but says it's very reckless to reveal internal matters of her clan so freely. About this, the ogress claims she trusts her ability to judge others' character, and the way she spoke made Ulmandra feel jealous again. With that, Olulu asks the human to marry her and become the new clan chief, as it's the only way to change the clan's course. Unable to show his anger, Ulmandra asks for some time for them to think. Subsequently, Uchimura takes some time alone to reflect on all these matters. At that moment, his eye once again emits the sign from the same bar as before, and that's where he appears immediately after. By his side, Ulmandra was saying that the lion is the strongest wild animal, and the master insists it's the gorillas. Either way, Ulmandra believes a group of lions symbolizes pride. Upon hearing her talk about group and pride, Uchimura comes to a conclusion. Thus, the man returns to the real world, straightens his tie, and promises to resolve the case. The next morning, he meets with his travel partner to report that he has made progress in the negotiations. The plan was to meet the ogre clan soon. However, the human intends to take Ulmandra to another place. If all goes well, he will manage to have the negotiation session conducted by the chief himself. A week later, they meet with Ogre, who tells them to stop this charade because all he wants to know is why the other races have joined the Demon King's army. Upon hearing the question, Uchimura gives a small smile of satisfaction. That day, he told his partner he would recruit clans from the other races before Ogre, because previously they had Ogre support, but not anymore. Therefore, it should not be too difficult to annex the neighboring territory of the Ogre clan. Uchimura calls this strategy Operation Fortress of Large Enterprises. Reflecting on the current moment, Uchimura notes he used the same tactic a long time ago when trying to secure a contract with a large company. According to him, if you approach a large company at the front gate like a brute, they will kick you out. That's why Uchimura approached small and medium-sized companies first and offered his products to them. After that, the big companies started buying because they couldn't allow the smaller ones to have innovative products alone. In other words, if the semi-humans around joined the demons, the ogre chief could never ignore them. Keeping this in mind, the human argues that the neighbors were having trouble with expenses, and that a union with the Demon King ensures a minimum standard of living. Ogre gets even more irritated and declares himself the lord of these lands, and that's exactly what Uchimura wants, to see the leader of the ogres lose his reason, because he who loses control loses the negotiation. To escalate the intensity, the man reveals that Olulu was a protagonist in the negotiations with the neighbors. Soon after, the ogress argues that the only way out of the hole was with the help of the demon army. Crying, she says she has always admired her father's strength, but the warrior known as Ogre the Invincible is now old and sick. At that time, Uchimura proposes an alliance, not an annexation. That is, an equal partnership for both sides. The foreign manager knows it's the same thing, as the Demon King guarantees autonomy to the annexed territories, but the way of speaking makes all the difference when dealing with a proud leader like Ogre. Thus, the leader of the ogres asks for time to think. Then the negotiators leave, and watching his daughter depart, the ogre smiles and agrees alone that times have changed. A few days later, Ulmandra informs that Ogre has reached out to make a deal. However, Uchimura was focused on something else, as the Demon King had told him to appoint a subordinate, but the young man has no idea whom to choose since it cannot be Ulmandra herself. The demoness is pleased to hear this, while Ululu arrives as her clan's representative to formalize the alliance with the Demon King. After Uchimura's departure, Ogre began to pass management tasks to the most competent members of the clan, and since then, everything has improved. For that reason, Ululu would do anything for the human as a thank you. Soon after, Uchimura invites the ogress to work with him. Following this, he analyzes that the demon army has grown considerably, but that every great return comes with a great risk. The following day, Uchimura was deeply engrossed in his work, devising ways to enhance efficiency on certain military matters. Suddenly, Ulmandra entered his office to announce that the negotiations with the Bear tribe had been a success. Now, it was up to the foreign manager to organize the terms for each side to finalize the agreement. Reflecting on this, Uchimura recalled endless meetings where those terms never seemed to clarify, but it appeared those days had changed. Ulmandra had also heard that Uchimura's efforts to facilitate an alliance between the demonic army and the ogres would be rewarded in a ceremony, the details of which she would provide after lunch. Surprised by this news, Uchimura mused that he had never received as much as a ham sandwich above his salary at his old job. Speaking of the perks of his new role, lunch was delivered to his office by none other than the Hell Aggressor herself. However, the gym porridge served was quite bland, according to Uchimura. Ulmandra admitted she had diluted the porridge with water to make it stretch further, leaving him quite frustrated. He reflected that Jim, a type of grain grown on the farmlands around the city, and thanks to Ululu, who was well-versed in royal studies and diplomacy, Uchimura was learning about this new world. Ultimately, the military ration from the demonic army was just a poor Jim porridge, something he understood, but truthfully, he missed having meat. Sensing his friend's frustration, even though he hadn't voiced it, Ulmandra assured him she understood his plight and invited him to go hunting. More precisely, when they reached the forest, the general informed that the army had received a mission to exterminate magical beasts in the area. Among the demi-humans living there, 5 orcs had been entirely devoured. But Uchimura panicked, while the demon explained that the strong feed on the weak. That was the law of nature. Normally, orcs would find a way to defeat these magical beasts on their own, but this time, the enemy was too strong. Considering the gym porridge needed to be diluted to stretch, Uchimura imagined the orcs were not fully healthy and well-fed, especially with this magical beast disaster. Undoubtedly, this world was as problematic as the human's original one. Interrupting his thoughts, Ulmandra shouted that she had found an edible mushroom that the orcs had been collecting when attacked. This mushroom was considered a very precious ingredient in the region. Seizing the moment, Ulmandra planned to wait for a magical boar to appear on its own. It wasn't long before the giant beast emerged with its red eyes and sharp tusks. Ulmandra ordered Uchimura to slowly back away while she handled the problem. Then, with a devastating spinning kick, she struck the animal's head squarely. Uchimura considered that boars lacked a concept of three-dimensional space. They could only perceive what was directly ahead, behind, or beside them. With an overhead attack, Ulmandra left the creature without a response. However, the boar recovered from the blow and flung several rocks with its tusks at the enemy, who dodged the projectiles with her vast agility and landed a punch on its ribcage. To be capable of such force, Uchimura noted that the Hell Aggressor also needed to be a monster, but still the difference in resilience between them was surreal, and the demon lacked the decisive power to end the fight outright. After all, wild beasts like boars use their tusks and claws to threaten their prey, but humanoids like Uchimura and Ulmandra were fragile animals with very low killing ability. That's why humans had always needed external weapons like swords, shields, grenades, and rifles as a way to compensate for their lack of natural strength. In Uchimura's mind, Ulmandra was well aware of this, which is why he couldn't understand why she hadn't brought any weapon for such a lousy hunt. Meanwhile, the Hell Aggressor realized she couldn't defeat the boar this way, so she would have to reveal some of her true skills. As the body takes time to recover from such techniques, the demon always avoided using them, but there was no other way in this fight. As the boar charged at the enemy, she considered that if she opened the abdomen and damaged the stomach, the boar would be inimitable, so she grabbed its tusk and exterminated the animal with a type of reddish energy. Terrified, Uchimura wondered if this was the magic of a demon, while Ulmandra invited him to eat a boar, though the poor guy had lost his appetite after witnessing the disturbing scene. Later, the general of the demonic army received thanks from the local demi-humans, while Uchimura realized that these people were just like the boar and felt even more disturbed. A resident handed Ulmandra the boar's leg to cook and start the feast, and Uchimura regained his happiness knowing he would finally have meat in his belly. Thus, the general grilled the beast with her fire, but as she was preparing the second thigh, she simply carbonized the piece with fur and all. Uchimura complained that this wasn't much to his taste, but the woman insisted he eat it. When the human reluctantly bit into it, the bitterness of the meat juice spread across his tongue like gasoline, and he complained to his colleague for forcing him to eat such crap. In response, Ulmandra retorted that this guy complained about every meal he received, so Uchimura realized that the cultural difference between humans and demons might lead him to deep indigestion. To reverse the situation, he asked a resident if everyone could use the stove, but the demi-human regretted to inform that salt was running out, which could ruin the feast. Thus, Uchimura rolled up his sleeves and requested just a bit of salt and edible mushrooms to solve the issue. Sometime later, he served the village grilled wild boar on a skewer and wild boar mushroom soup. When Ulmandra tasted it, she was absolutely enchanted by the incredible flavor. Meanwhile, as the villagers enjoyed the meal, Uchimura reflected that pigs tend to smell gamey, so after the scent faded, he soaked the meat in water to draw out the blood. Since pork is rich in fat, it's important to keep the meat far enough from the fire to not burn it, but melt away the excess fat. The same goes for when you want to add meat to a soup. Blanching the meat a bit removes the odor. Moreover, Uchimura offered to teach the villagers how to cook this way if they wished. In Ulmandra's view, such a gesture might tarnish the reputation of the four great ones, but he thought the opposite. Just by observing dietary habits, one can predict the development of an entire civilization. For this tribe, if they had a way to prepare meat properly, it could evolve. The demoness recognized that this village was weak and struggled with food shortages, and that needed to change. When night fell, the Hell Aggressor summoned her companion to head home. To light their path and keep enemies at bay, she conjured a fireball that only demons could wield with their omniscience. Reflecting on this, Uchimura thought about how, unable to use magic, the demi-humans led by the Gnome needed to train day and night to compensate for this absence. By the way, he asked if Sylphid was a demon or a demi-human. Although she wasn't sure, based on the title Conjurer of the Final Storm, Ulmandra believed he was also a demon, although he never showed up at the meetings in person. Later, as the two made their way, Uchimura suggested that Ulmandra also use weapons since the magic she employed took time to recover, a difficulty evident in their fight against the wild boar. In other words, fighting without a weapon is like protecting yourself from the cold without proper clothes. Ultimately, it's important to consider a coat. Hearing this, the demonist extinguished the fire and admitted that the foreign manager might be right, but his comment was an insult to her. Because of this, she changed plans and ordered the human to stay in the village to be escorted back to the castle in the morning. After all, the general had begun to trust the human, but unfortunately, he was still just a man from another world whose focus on efficiency didn't mesh well with the demons. After saying this, the Hell Aggressor flew off and left the man alone in the forest, so he ran back to the village to avoid any surprises. The next day, after Uchimura reintroduced himself to the leader, the Demon King praised the work of his human general, but noted that he had returned only now, while Ulmandra had arrived the previous night. Then in tears, the man cried out that he did not deserve to be one of the four great ones. Faced with the situation, the king ordered the man to resolve his issue with the demoness, and that this was not just a personal discussion between the two, but also a way for Uchimura to better understand the world he was part of. After the meeting, Uchimura tried to understand why Ulmandra had been so upset. Considering that the two most prominent races in this kingdom were demons and demi-humans, his initial impression was that demons were more intellectual, while demi-humans like orcs were more savage. However, taking Ulmandra as an example, the human reflected that she demonstrated just the opposite due to her habits and way of dressing. According to Uchimura, the way a people dress reflects their era, culture, religion, and way of thinking. In the case of demons, they rely heavily on magic to define themselves as individuals, while other races are not capable of doing the same. With this in mind, Uchimura concluded that he needed to discard his prejudices to thoroughly study how this society functions. For this, he picked up a book that said, for demons, having a sculptural body is a matter of honor to evolve their spell-casting ability. The more the body is trained, the stronger the magic becomes, and that's why demons dress in clothes that expose their bodies more, as a way to display their honor and magical power. In summary, Uchimura had made that comparison to Ulmandra about wearing proper clothes for the cold, which might sound offensive in her culture. Speaking of her, the demoness went straight to cry her woes to Olulu, saying that Uchimura hated her body. Then the ogress explained to the demoness the cultural difference between them and the human, as he did not see body exposure as something positive. In fact, he might think that demons are perverts for it. Seeing that the demoness was literally burying her head in the ground because of this and wanted to know what to do, Olulu recalled her first day as a subordinate to Uchimura. He had said that she should feel free to discuss anything she wanted with him openly, as together they could find a solution to everything. Meanwhile, Uchimura was at his favorite bar, but this time other humans were present, all dressed in office uniforms like him. The guy was enjoying his steak and grilled meat with pepper, until the bar owner smiled and commented that this food was the specialty of the house. As this was the first time he had seen this man smiling, Uchimura had an idea. Thus, the two met hastily after understanding what they had to do. First, the human admitted that he found the demoness's body extremely sexy, and she responded that she wasn't perverted and just wanted to hear him praising her body. After realizing what they had just said, they were embarrassed. Then Uchimura bowed to apologize. Similarly, Ulmandra also bowed to apologize for having imposed her ideas in the conversation and leaving the man alone in the forest on impulse. Honestly, Uchimura confessed that he felt his life was in grave danger at that moment. However, he stressed that the important thing was that they sought to learn more about each other to reach a solution, and because of this, he believed that the two could be great companions. Ulmandra didn't quite understand if the guy meant something with ulterior motives, but she ended up confirming. With that, Uchimura was relieved to be able to work more peacefully, without a messed up environment in the castle. After that, the Demon King gathered his subjects and allies to announce that following the alliance with the ogres and the integration of the 7 tribes, the demonic army had grown even stronger. For this reason, the leader wanted to congratulate Denosuke Uchimura for his incredible performance in such a short period. To reward his merits, the Dark Lord gave a magical stone to the general. However, although grateful, Uchimura claimed he couldn't have achieved any of this without the help of Ulmandra, so he offered the stone to the demoness and sought her favor. Watching the scene, Olulu reflected that giving someone of the opposite sex such an item is considered a marriage proposal in demonic culture. Meanwhile, an unknown demoness spied on the scene from afar and concluded that a loser like Uchimura had gained recognition. However, despite all the celebration and recognition the human had achieved, when he returned after a few days to meet with his boss, he kneeled down and begged for a second chance before anything else was said, thinking he had messed up in some forgotten way. On the other hand, the Demon King responded that Uchimura's problem was that he didn't acknowledge his accomplishments and had the self-esteem of a gothic e-girl suffering from paternal absence. Changing the subject, he asked the Foreign Affairs manager what he thought about the relationship between demons and demi-humans. In his view, the difference between the two races was what mattered most. After all, with the ability to use magic, demons held numerous advantages in society, which marginalized the demi-humans. With this, the Dark Lord fully agreed that the issue was that only a few races were capable of wielding sorcery, and that's where Uchimura came in. The general needed to find a way for everyone to have this capability, as it would decrease social inequality. Uchimura was grateful for the opportunity, but he remembered that he was an outsider who also lacked magical skills. However, that was exactly why the Demon King had given him the magic stone a few days ago, a rough, unpolished gem that the human must figure out how to use with the help of a specialist in magical research, Sylphid, the Storm Archmage. Anyway, before anything else, his boss warned him in advance that Sylphid could be a real pain. After the meeting, Uchimura left the throne room, and Ulmandra appeared snooping around. Discovering that he had been given an exclusive mission by the boss, the demoness imagined that the human's work was going exceptionally well. Later, Uchimura studied how the incredible power of this item could be utilized in various ways. At that moment, Olulu brought the general some tea because he seemed exhausted from the extra work he had been doing in recent days. She thought he should head home a bit earlier today just to avoid a free burnout. But Uchimura appreciated his colleague's concern and promised that he was just finishing up for today, then took the magic stone and asked if she knew whether the demi-humans could use it to attain magical powers like those of the demons. The ogre replied that they could, but only if you have the skill for it. A stone alone won't work miracles. Thus, Uchimura knew he needed to learn more to be able to use sorcery, and the only way was to ask Sylphid directly. After gathering the courage to face that mysterious and odd being, a man went to his room but was greeted again by Belinda, his assistant. She asked who he was and sheepishly explained that they had talked a few days ago, and that he was one of the 4 great generals. Realizing she hadn't treated a high-ranking officer properly, Belinda apologized but informed him that Sylphid was absent once again. But Uchimura countered that this couldn't be possible because the boss had said there was a meeting scheduled between them today, but the woman repeated with less patience that the Archmage was not present and promised to contact him as soon as he returned. However, as she was about to close the door in his face, Uchimura placed his foot in the door and insisted that since he was in front of the wizard's assistant, maybe they could discuss the matter. At the same time, Ulmandra continued spying on the human general and didn't like seeing him enter another woman's room. Inside, Belinda asked the man to be brief as she had other things to do. Going straight to the point, Uchimura asked if, in fact, Belinda was Sylphid, and he had 3 arguments to support his hypothesis. First, she wore glasses, and knowing that demons exalt physical strength, they usually don't wear such things, so he thought they were fake glasses just for style. Second, there was no Belinda on the demon army's list. Third, the boss had warned that Sylphid would pretend to be someone else to avoid work. Backed into a corner, Belinda confessed she was one of the 4 generals. Then Uchimura asked why he was hiding his real identity and dressing like a shoe. Sylphid explained that the reason was obvious. When he's in his general form, everyone has some task for him. Moreover, the mage refused to cooperate with the human and didn't care that these were orders from the boss, especially since he had already dealt with that damned magic stone and didn't want to do it again. However, since Uchimura had managed to reveal his identity, Sylphid would throw him a bone and demonstrate what he was saying, since the human was utterly lost. With that, the Archmage placed on the table a device whose base was made of a black mineral that allowed easy passage of magical power through it. The yellow stones were magical and allowed the use of various spells, and this device had been created by Sylphid himself after years of research. Uchimura was eager to start mass production of this item, but the mage warned that each piece cost 10 million G because so many magic stones don't grow on trees, so good luck getting the budget for that. With that, Sylphid recommended the easiest way to solve this problem: give up. Since that wasn't an option, Uchimura thought of a way to turn the tables on this tricky guy. He analyzed that it would reduce the cost if, instead of building a device full of magic stones, they used just one, even if it only produced one spell instead of several. Uchimura had seen a lot of this in the world where he came from. Instead of adding features, the company intentionally reduces them, creating a new product. Sylphid acknowledged that this would make the item cheaper, and that no one had ever thought of that before, while Uchimura handed his magic stone to the mage and asked him to make a test product. Motivated by the challenge, the Storm Archmage snapped his fingers to reveal a secret door in his room and announced he would stay up all night to produce the device, and Uchimura would be his personal assistant in this endeavor. With that, he dragged Uchimura into the workshop. Outside, Ulmandra, who clearly has nothing better to do, can no longer bear waiting for the young man to come out and starts pounding on Sylphid's door to get someone to open it. The next morning, Uchimura was a bit less human after staying up all night, while Sylphid was puffing up with pride for having brought such a complex idea to life in such a short time. Soon he names the new device Rosmarin, a magical stone capable of casting a single spell but now producible on a large scale due to cost reduction. Despite having stayed up all night working on this, the mage wants to test the new toy on Uchimura right away. Absolutely shattered, the man pleads for a moment to gather his thoughts, and the mage gives him exactly 1 hour. With that, the poor guy heads to the door to grab a bite and take a nap, until Ulmandra forces her way into the room with a spell and asks him why he spent the night there. However, the plan backfires. Weakened by the intense night of work, Uchimura is thrown to the ground like a discarded rag doll and nearly becomes a t-shirt print on the spot. The demon shakes the dazed man awake while he begs for it to stop before he's completely dismantled. At that moment, Sylphid appears in his Archmage attire and with a commanding male voice, orders Ulmandra to take the chaos outside. The demoness asks where that woman went, and the mage replies that he has no idea, as it's just him and Uchimura there. Amidst the confusion, Lilim and Olulu rush in to call Ulmandra and Uchimura as a flock of Aceto birds are attacking some villages. Known for their immense fury, these birds are so large they cannot fly, and the Demon King has ordered them dealt with. Ulmandra is tasked with saving 3 villages and is dragged outside, while Sylphid sees this as the perfect opportunity to test his creation. For this, the mage takes his colleague to a huge field to have space for the test. Some locals appear out of nowhere, so Uchimura asks them to back off a bit. Sylphid hands the human a stone and asks him to send out a fireball. Despite being terrified, the man follows the mage's commands and imagines the stone as part of him, with his blood flowing through the device. Having done this, Uchimura manages to conjure a fireball and is astonished. At this point, the flock of Aceto appears on the field. Uchimura launches several fireballs to hold off the birds, but the device stops working when an animal attacks him up close. Sylphid fends off the approaching birds using magic, giving the external manager space to try his spell again, but it's not working for some reason. After eliminating the first wave of the Aceto, the Storm Archmage concludes that the stone didn't withstand the battle's intensity and deems the experiment a failure. At night, the generals share a soup made from Aceto with the village residents, and Uchimura comments to Sylphid that these demi-humans seem quite fragile. At this, the mage removes her helmet and reveals her feminine face again, noting that although these people are weak and live in poverty, they always show happiness and kindness in their hearts. This reminds the mage of the day she decided to invent the original magical device. Originally born into a family of merchant elves, things went awry and she left home. After being found wandering by some demi-humans, Sylphid was welcomed into that village where no one could use magic and everyone fought against poverty. Hoping to help these people, the witch began working on the devices, but in doing so, she lost sight of the main reason for her research. Remembering this, she assures Ulmandra that the role of a scientist is to advance society, so it's a matter of honor for them to make it work. By the way, the woman is certain that the Asahi will attack again soon, so finding a solution to the stone's breakdown is urgent. With this in mind, Ulmandra reappears at his imaginary or not bar. This time, Ulmandra was eating cooked entrails and drinking merrily after hours. Witnessing the demoness's happiness, Ulmandra reflects that the entrails are indeed delicious, although they used to be difficult to store and prepare. In the past, people would vomit directly from such food, but today, thanks to the high level of collagen, people can enjoy this meal as things that were once seen as useless have become indispensable after undergoing certain changes. After this thought, Ulmandra asks Sylphid to produce another 10 rosmarin for tomorrow as he will solve this problem. Thus, when they face the flock of Asahi again, the external manager positions the stones on the ground and activates them all at once as the birds approach. From what he understood in the previous conflict, the Asahi are greatly bothered by the shrill sound upon the stone's activation, enough to drive them away. After scaring off the animals, the man realizes that this strategy barely consumed the magic stones. A few days later, back at the castle, when presenting the discovery to the demon lord, Ulmandra reports that they don't need to cast spells to deter these monsters, as this new device is cheap, economical, and capable of scaring away various types of animals. Thus, the villages will be free from potentially dangerous wild animals. Pleased with the outcome of the discovery, the king orders more magical devices to be distributed to the villages. After the meeting, Ulmandra thanks Sylphid for all of her help in researching and developing the discovery. On the other hand, it is the scientist who thinks she should thank him, as the human managed to restore a tremendous purpose to her work. Because of this, the mage rewards her comrade with a combat magic device loaded with fire, capable of up to 30 shots. But Ulmandra asks if Sylphid produced this during the development of rosmarin, and she responds that she isn't called a genius for nothing. With the end of this meeting, Ulmandra returns to the office eager to get to work, until Ulmandra bursts into the room violently, complaining that the guy didn't keep her updated at any point about what he was doing. Anyway, since he gave her the stone as a gift, surely he wasn't flirting with another woman in vain. The next day, back at Ulmandra's imaginary bar, Ulmandra decides to bother a kid who's holding a cell phone. She mentions she's envious because the kid lives with his parents and can spend all day on the internet, to which the boy replies that she's annoying. At that moment, Ulmandra notices the young boy isn't watching Minecraft videos on YouTube, but instead investing in stocks, and judging by the watch on his wrists, this kid is no amateur. Undeterred, Ulmandra tells the boy to take off his hood since they're inside the establishment. When ignored, the demoness repeats the demand, this time twice as loud, and attempts to physically remove the hood. Watching the scene, Ulmandra reflects that he too needs to remove his hood, not from his sweatshirt, but from his attitude at work. So far, the human has tried his best to follow the Demon King's guidelines and maintain good work leading such a trusted position, but if he wants the demonic army to grow in the long run, Ulmandra must figure out what needs resolving and tackle each issue one at a time. With that, the general decides it's time to act. Keeping this in mind, he heads to the kingdom's street market and thinks it was a great idea to invite Ulmandra. Besides, he thinks the demoness looks rather charming in that dress, a significant change from her usual attire. Ulmandra feels terribly embarrassed and remembers the conversation she had yesterday with Ululu. In it, she told the ogre that she was invited to the market with Ulmandra tomorrow, but she has no idea how to act on a date, as such events are like duels where each combatant must wear the best armor possible. Thinking it over, the demoness wants to wear a very short outfit to showcase all the power of her race, but Ululu warns that he might not appreciate that, as Ulmandra is human and perceives things differently. In fact, Ulmandra should wear something more modest and use some accessories. The demoness thinks dressing that way is humiliating, but the ogre is sure that wearing that thong is far worse. Recalling the conversation, Ulmandra thanks her friend for making the encounter with Ulmandra quite smooth. By the way, the man comments that today's research will be very gentle because of Ulmandra. The woman is confused by this statement, so the human confirms that they are there to conduct market research, throwing the poor demoness's expectations out the window. As the demoness's rage overflows and flames around her body, Uchimura explains that the idea is to hear the people's opinions to analyze the situation from their perspective, as common people can provide inspiration and accelerate the growth of the army. As soon as the human reaches the first stall, the seller knows he is one of the 4 great generals known as the manager of the exterior. Uchimura asks how he knows this, and the man explains that the news has spread, especially since it's peculiar for a human dressed like that to be at the royal castle. With this, Uchimura notes that local merchants keep up to date on all matters to avoid surprises in business. If he wants to gather information, the man must pay good attention to the network of contacts of the traders. Also, the vendor comments that he didn't expect 2 generals to be there, especially in such a nice atmosphere. Ulmandra is offended and explains that this is just market research, but since there are 2 such important people at his stall, the merchant is willing to offer a fantastic promotion for a pair of gold cups he has. Without a second thought, Uchimura says he'll take them, but in exchange, he'd like a favor. Ignoring their conversation, Ulmandra thinks Uchimura is buying this pair of cups to throw in the towel, regarding the research and admit once and for all that this was a date from the start. Then, Uchimura asks the woman to leave as he has already gathered good information and product samples, and now it's time to continue the work. As he walks among the people, Uchimura makes notes of what he finds interesting. During a brief stop at a coffee shop, he analyzes that the alliance between demons, ogres, and minotaurs has brought great advances in cultural and talent exchanges among these peoples. Ulmandra adds that they've never had so many stores open around the kingdom before, but Uchimura points out that there are also downsides to this type of policy, like the food issue. As the population has grown rapidly, it becomes harder to secure enough food. For example, the price of Jimu has risen significantly, making life difficult for the people. In fact, these days, Ulmandra went to a Jimu store and tried to force the owner to lower the prices, but it seemed he wasn't making any profit either. Uchimura thinks the wholesalers are to blame as they facilitate the sale of production goods through various channels and assume the role of intermediaries in the business. They probably bought the Jimu farms and monopolized this product. With the monopoly, they can sell at whatever price they want, and you can be sure they won't sell cheap. Hence, when Jimu reaches the market shelves, small merchants also need to raise their prices to make a profit. As such, Ulmandra wants to have a healthy talk with these wholesalers, but Uchimura warns that this is just speculation at the moment because a group called the Guild is responsible for managing the wholesalers, and any overstep might represent a problem, as this issue affects the entire country. Moreover, there's still the social inequality between demons and demi-humans, and these problems must be resolved one by one. With that, Uchimura closes his notebook and announces the end of the market research for today. As there's still time left, he asks what Ulmandra wants to do. Shyly, she imagines that now a real date begins until Gnome appears unexpectedly at their table, saying that today is Ruria Day. But Uchimura asks what that is, and the demi-human explains that it's a traditional celebration of her people that consists of gifting people who are important to you. But Uchimura asks if Gnome will gift the army, and she replies that she certainly won't gift this grumpy-faced demoness sitting at the table. At that moment, a couple of demi-humans beg for the leader's help to save their shop. Without delay, the generals are taken to the couple's food stand, where they explain that they have been selling a dish called chumozu for as long as they can remember. However, their business has been declining, and after a certain merchant appeared, they even considered giving up. This merchant, a major trader named Budagarian, had suggested that since the price of Jimu was rising, they could make a profit by selling chumozu at a more affordable price. Consequently, he placed a massive order with the couple. They joyfully worked through many nights to fulfill the deal, but when the delivery day came, Budagarian claimed he was unaware that chumozu couldn't be stored and had to be consumed the same day. As a result, the couple lost the order for nothing, resulting in a huge loss. Upon hearing this story, Gnome comments that Uchimura is not only good at negotiations but also an excellent cook, so he might have some insights. Uchimura then tastes a chumozu from the couple's tray and declares his intention to save their shop. With that, Gnome leaves the matter in the hands of the human general. First off, Uchimura wants to establish the goals that the merchants need to achieve currently. Since chumozu must be eaten on the day it's made, they need to sell 300 pieces, equivalent to what the shop would sell in 2 months. Uchimura tasted a chumozu and thought it tasted similar to Japanese mochi. Although tasty, it lacked distinctive features to make it highly appealing, but this could also be an advantage as mochi, with its mild flavor is often used to accompany a variety of different dishes. Now, to decide which dishes these might be, Uchimura needs to understand the clientele of the shop. The couple mentions that their main customers were older, but chumozu has become unpopular among this age group. Even the couple themselves are not fond of it. Following this, Uchimura asks the vendors to create a new chumozu recipe, while Ulmandra is tasked with visiting some recently listed shops for assistance. Sometime after this meeting, Uchimura returns to the middle of the market with a drum to draw attention, loudly announcing that today is Ruya Day, featuring traditional target shooting at boars, beetle wrestling, and hit the mole, a game where players hammer plastic worms popping out of holes. Amid this, Ulmandra bets on a beetle that just kicked its opponent out of the ring, and she cheers for the victory. The demons around are puzzled by this Ruya Day, so Ikimura explains that the celebration originated from an ancient story about a beautiful girl who met a boy selling chimozu, and the two fell in love. However, the king at the time was so jealous of the woman's beauty that he forcibly separated them. Nevertheless, they continued to meet secretly on new moon nights. One such meeting occurred during a Ruya event, where they ate chimozu and wished to live together forever. Eventually, the gods granted their wish, blessing the couple with a 7-colored rainbow, and they were taken to the world of stars to live happily ever after. After sharing this story, Uchimura announces that tonight is also a new moon night, so everyone should give a chimozu to their loved one to make their wish come true. Seeing the public's positive response to this tale, Uchimura recalls that the best idea he had was to ask Gnome about Ruya Day. Combining this with his knowledge of festive events from his original world, such as Christmas, New Year's, and even Halloween, Uchimura devised a strategy to stimulate the desire to purchase among the people. With this in mind, he tells the shocked couple that it's time to show what they can do, so they present their colorful and attractive new chimozu recipe, which resembles a rainbow. As everyone begins to eat, Ulmandra notices that most of the buyers are young people, and Uchimura explains that the key to the operation was repositioning, as sometimes time leads to a decline in sales, so it's crucial to change the target audience to refresh the clientele. Indeed, due to the sales success, the human begins to dream too big about other stores and fantasizes about a network of chimozu shops funding the army's growth. After some time, the shop couple thanks Uchimura and Ulmandra for everything they've done for them. But Uchimura makes it a point to highlight that Gnome also helped a lot by promoting the shop during the event. Seeing that Ulmandra is annoyed that the man mentioned her arch-rival, he shares that, as she helped with sales today, many demi-humans have changed their perception of demons on this day. Subsequently, the couple gives them a collection of chimozu that forms a rainbow. Then, Uchimura invites the demoness to sit together, and he finally displays the pair of cups he bought earlier. Missile as always, Ulmandra thinks this is definitely the moment the man has been waiting for to propose to her once and for all. Although not feeling completely ready, the demoness decides to let life take its course and eagerly awaits the official proposal. However, as the man says nothing during this time, she awkwardly asks what he will wish for when eating the chimozu. Without hesitation, he replies that he wishes their next case will also be a success, prompting Ulmandra to lose her patience and scold the man as a workaholic. Upon returning to the castle, the foreign affairs manager reported to the supreme leader that he had learned a great deal from his market research, especially about a neighboring country known as the Land of Gold, which boasts an incredible gold reserve. He stressed the need for the demonic kingdom to target this land to establish a business network, as trading with wealthy nations would be crucial for the army's strategy. The king suggested that rosmarin, a valuable product from their nation, could be traded. Uchimura, however, felt that such war technology should remain a secret. The Lord countered that researchers of Sylphid's caliber were so rare that it was nearly impossible to replicate their discoveries. Even if the rosmarin were to be stolen, the thieves could never steal the talent of its creator. Moreover, although this nation is not the largest, it certainly matches others in terms of talent, and with men like Uchimura at his side, the Demon King was confident of their success. However, he warned that the human general must be very cautious, for the Land of Gold, known as the Kingdom of Fury, is not always a pleasant place. Hey guys, the source will be in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming videos. See you.